What if miracles weren't rare, but expected? What would it look like if healing became a daily reality? And what happens when ordinary people carry extraordinary power? In the early days of the church, something remarkable was unfolding. Not behind closed doors, not hidden in secret, but out in the open for everyone to see. The apostles gathered among the people, and there was a sense of unity that could not be ignored. They were not separated by status or position. They stood together, visible, consistent, and filled with purpose. And then signs and wonders began to happen. Not once, not occasionally, but continually. People were being healed, lives were being restored. Hope was rising in places where pain had once settled deeply. There was something different about this movement. It wasn't built on human strength or clever ideas. It was marked by power, but not the kind that dominates, the kind that restores. As word began to spread, more people gathered, not out of curiosity alone, but out of expectation. They had heard what was happening. They had seen the changes, and they came, carrying their needs, their struggles, and their questions. The sick were brought into the streets. Some were laid on simple mats, others carried by loved ones who refused to give up hope. They weren't looking for attention. They were looking for healing. And in a moment that feels almost impossible to imagine, people believed that even Peter's shadow passing over them might bring restoration. Think about that level of faith, not based on superstition, but on what they had already witnessed. They had seen enough to believe that something real was happening, something beyond explanation, something that reached into the deepest parts of human need, and the results were undeniable. Those who were sick were healed. Those who were tormented found peace. Those who had been pushed to the margins were brought back into community. This was not selective, it was not limited to a few. Everyone who came received. That detail matters, because it shows the heart behind the power. This was not about displaying ability, it was about meeting need. It was about restoring dignity. It was about showing that no one was beyond reach. In a world where many were overlooked, ignored, or forgotten, this movement stood in contrast. It said, "You matter." It said, "There is hope." It said, "Healing is possible." But what made this possible? It wasn't just the presence of the apostles. It was the presence of God working through them. They were vessels, not the source. And they understood that. They didn't claim the power as their own. They didn't turn it into personal gain. They remained grounded, focused on the mission, aware that what they carried was not for themselves, but for others. This perspective kept them aligned, because power without humility can easily become dangerous. But power with purpose becomes transformative. The apostles operated from a place of surrender. They didn't seek recognition, they responded to need. They didn't elevate themselves, they lifted others. And because of that, what flowed through them remained pure. This story invites us to consider something deeper, not just the miracles, but the mindset. What kind of life allows something like this to happen? What kind of heart becomes a channel for healing? It begins with faith, not a passive belief, but an active trust. A trust that God is still working. A trust that what seems impossible is not beyond reach. And then it grows through obedience. The apostles didn't isolate themselves. They showed up. They remained among the people. They stayed connected to the very ones who needed what they carried. That matters. Because sometimes the distance we create keeps us from being part of something meaningful. But when we step into the lives of others, with compassion, with openness, with willingness, we create space for something greater to move. There is also courage in this story. The apostles were not operating in a safe environment. There was opposition, there was tension. There were those who questioned, who doubted, who resisted, and yet they continued. They didn't allow fear to silence them. They didn't allow uncertainty to stop them. They moved forward, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary, because lives were being changed, because people were being restored, because the message they carried was too important to keep hidden. And that same courage is still needed today, not necessarily to perform miracles in the same visible way, but to live with the same boldness of faith, to believe that change is possible, to act when others hesitate, to step in when others step back. Because healing doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it is physical, sometimes it is emotional, sometimes it is spiritual. But in every form, it requires presence, it requires care, it requires someone willing to stand in the gap. The early believers didn't wait for perfect conditions. They responded to what was in front of them. A need became an opportunity. A struggle became a moment for compassion. And through those moments, something powerful was built. Not just individual stories of healing, but a community marked by hope. That kind of environment doesn't happen by accident. It is created through consistent actions, through people who choose to care, through individuals who are willing to be available. And that is where this story becomes personal. Because while we may not see crowds gathering in the streets in the same way, the needs are still there. People are still hurting, still searching, still hoping for something to change. And perhaps the question is not whether miracles can happen, but whether we are willing to be part of the process. Are we open to being used in ways we didn't expect? Are we willing to step beyond comfort to help someone else? Are we paying attention to the needs around us? Because sometimes the impact we are meant to have is closer than we think. A word of encouragement, a moment of listening, an act of kindness. These may not look like miracles, but they carry the same spirit. They bring light into darkness. They bring hope into uncertainty. They bring healing into places that have been ignored. And when these actions are multiplied, when more people begin to live this way, the effect is powerful. Just like in the early church, what started with a few became something that spread. Not because of strategy, but because of authenticity. Because people saw something real, something they couldn't deny, and they responded. That is how transformation works. It begins small, it grows through consistency, and it spreads through connection. The apostles didn't set out to create a movement defined by miracles. They simply followed what they were called to do, and the result was something far greater than they could have planned. This reminds us that we don't need to control outcomes. We need to stay faithful in action, to show up, to care, to trust that what we do matters, even when we don't see immediate results. Because impact is not always visible in the moment. Sometimes it unfolds over time. Sometimes it reaches further than we realize. But it always begins with a choice to believe, a choice to act, a choice to care. And in that choice, we step into something bigger than ourselves. The story of the apostles healing many is not just about what happened then. It is about what is possible now. It is a reminder that faith is not meant to be passive. It is meant to move, to respond, to engage with the world in a way that brings life. And when we live this way, we begin to see changes. Not always dramatic, not always immediate, but real, steady, meaningful. Because at its core, this story is about hope. A hope that reaches beyond circumstances. A hope that restores what feels broken. A hope that invites us to believe again. And maybe today, that hope is exactly what someone needs. Maybe it's what you need. To know that change is possible, that healing is not out of reach, that you are not forgotten, and that even in the middle of uncertainty, something greater is at work. So as we reflect on this moment in history, we are not just looking back, we are being invited forward into a life that is active, a life that is connected, a life that carries something meaningful into the lives of others, because the story is still being written, and each of us has a part to play. Thank you for watching this video. If this message inspired you, don't forget to like, follow the channel, and share this video with someone who needs hope today.